You're watching The Ready Writer, a show where I get to speak to writers of all different genres, mediums, and experiences. The Ready Writer. Are you ready? Hello, it's time for another episode of The Ready Writer. Today I have with me Richard Stone, author of Story Intelligence. Let's get started. Starting from childhood, is writing, becoming an author, was that ever in your mind to do that? Or was this a part of your life that was unplanned?
That's a good question. I think I've been sort of writing on and off through. I would say that writing was not in my mind. Actually, I wanted to be an artist, a painter at one point, and I took myself off to the Art Institute. Also thought about becoming an actor and taking myself off to New York. Um, but it was only, I think, when I got serious about writing creatively, I had dropped out of graduate school and I was trying to find a job. I was really, and I'd gone off to study painting in Chicago and come back to Florida. I had taken a leave of absence actually, but I had no desire to go back and finish a doctorate in psychology. And so I ended up meeting through a couple connections a guy who was in the advertising business, a guy named Dave Chapman, and and he liked me. He liked he empathized with my story. And it turned out, as a young man, he wanted to be a comedian, and had took his life savings, went to New York City, enrolled in comedy school. There was some comedy school there, and that night the school burned down. And that was the end of his comedy career. He lost all of his money, and he came back with his tail between his legs back to Florida, but he was the creative force in this ad agency, and he was a sweet guy but a sort of a wild man. And at some point, here I was unemployed. I was living at my brother's house, just trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And he said, "Can you write, Rick?" And I said, "Oh yeah, yeah. I just finished a master's thesis." He said, "No, no, no, no. I'm not interested in that kind of writing. Can you write creatively?" And I went, "Oh, sure. Yeah, I'd taken some creative writing classes in college." And he said, "Well, good. I got this product here. It's a 5 gallon container of mulch, and it's called City Farmer. And we're considering taking it on as a client. Go and write some TV commercials and come back on Friday. Let me see what you got." And I had no clue how to write. I had never had a course in marketing or advertising or any of that stuff. Um, and it turned out I had that afternoon a interview with at a TV station in the sales department. Someone said, "Well, maybe you have to, to get in advertising. Sometimes people get in through sales, and then they start their own agencies." And so I had this interview. We had a nice interview, but they didn't have any positions, and it really wasn't for me. And as I was walking, I said, "By the way, how do you write a TV commercial?" And they said, "Oh, you take a sheet of paper, you put a line down the middle, and on one side you got the audio, and the other side you got the video." I said, "Thank you very much." And I went back to my brother's house. I didn't even have a typewriter. This was before computers, but I didn't even have a typewriter. I just hand wrote them. And I think I wrote 7 or 8 commercials. I had vegetables talking to each other in the freezer or in the refrigerator, asking them, how did you get here? And some of them were grown hydroponically and with City Farmer on the back deck of the apartment. I had Ma and Pa sitting on the porch, rocking, in the country. And they get a letter from their son who went to the city, who's just brought in his crops, and so they were fun and they were creative. I had no idea about lengths of time. I didn't know anything about lengths of time. Some were a minute, some were, there was no, but they were creative and fun. And I walked in and he was reading them. He says, "This is good. This is good. I like these. I like these." And and at that point, this was before the days of internships and those kinds of things. And I was desperate. He said, "Well, in this business, you got to hit the ground running." I said, "I tell you what, let me come to work for you for a month for free. You'll find out whether I got what it takes, and I'll find out if this is something I want to do." And I started there the next week. He had me meet his partner who could care less of whether I was creative. He wanted to know if I could sell.
Right.
But Dave was my mentor, and I got a chance to write lots of radio and TV and newsprint, and he would send me out to, go out and supervise a photo shoot. Well, I had never sort of supervised a photo shoot, but I would go out and use my eye and wing it. So that was so my early days of writing were mostly for the advertising business. And when I sold the agency in late 89, early 1990, soon after that, I was driving along the road one day, and I looked to my left, and there was a big stand of pampas grass there in the median. And I'm looking at it, and I suddenly imagined that there were creatures under the earth, and this was their hair that was sticking out. All we were seeing was the top of their head and their hair. And that became the idea for a children's novel called The Kingdom of Nout. And I went to work on that. And, like in the business, as you know, they say often that getting an agent is harder than getting a publisher. I got an agent. I had a really good agent in New York City who loved the book, and she couldn't sell it. So I eventually brought it out on my own. Then from there, things just kind of evolved. I was doing some work I started doing work with storytelling. I discovered the oral storytelling, not written storytelling, but oral storytelling. And I was working for Disney. It just started a thing called the Disney Institute, which at that time was like a educational vacation. Since it's closed, it didn't make it. And they've reappropriated the name for sort of their training programs to teach people the Disney way. But I was developing curricula, the story curricula for that institute. And one day I get a call from an editor from Hyperion, which is Disney's imprint. And they said, we think storytelling is going to be a big thing. You got any ideas for a book? Because we're interested in people who are teaching at the Disney Institute. And I had some ideas for a book about the healing power of story, and she said, we like that, and it was like 1, 2, 3. I had a contract to write a book, so that doesn't happen very often. I don't know if it happens anyway. I mean, it was just a fluky thing that happened, and so those were my beginning days with writing.
That's an amazing journey. You actually answered my next question, because I know most people who think about writing either procrastinate or they discourage themselves before anyone else can to not write. And so when you first got that idea of the fictional world, magical world of Not, and then you got yourself an agent, but she couldn't sell it. What do you think it was that you said, I'm going to do it anyways? You didn't give up.
Well, there's a little prior piece to that, which is I had my creative director at the agency, a guy named Philip Gullibuck, had been a student, and I'm trying to think of his name. He wrote a famous novel in the 50s called The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, which I think was a bestseller. And he ended up retiring in Central Florida, and he started a thing called the Writer's Room for budding writers. And at some point, he turned it over to Philip. He said, as much as I do now, it's yours, And so when I was writing The Kingdom of Nout, I would bring, installments to be read. And so Philip could be brutal. There was no holding back. If it sucked, he would say, "This is crap," and he'd tell me why it was crap. But I had developed a bit of a thick skin, having been in the ad business, because you can't get too wed to your ideas. You think you got a greatest idea for a commercial or whatever, and people can be brutal in that business. So when the book wouldn't sell, I had moved on. I did the healing art of storytelling. I actually brought out another book, the stories of the family legacy, which I brought out in the early 90s. That was actually written for the hospice field, and it was a book for reminiscence. So I just decided that the book needed to be out, I mean, and it's interesting. I have done nothing to promote that book, and it's sort of it hasn't, occasionally I'll get a chat. I don't know how anyone would find it now. It's on Amazon. You can find it. So, but I've been giving thought to, okay, maybe it's time to revisit the Kingdom of Now because it's a psycho-spiritual, ecological story. Uh, um, it's about our world and saving the world. And I think it's maybe its time has come. This is the right time for the book. So actually, I reserved a URL. I've got a URL sitting there that I haven't done anything with, and so I'm thinking when I someday when I have some free time, because the new book is really consuming a lot of my energy and time right now, is to go back. And so maybe the Kingdom Now, it's time for it to kind of have its real debut. It just didn't have a debut at the time. And I think that's a mistake that probably many authors make, or is that they get the book out, but they don't do anything to promote it, or they don't know how to promote it, and that is a hard thing to do. But you need to have a plan, and that was my mistake. I didn't have a plan. I didn't and I was involved. I had so many other things going on at the time. I couldn't really give it attention. I went and did some readings at schools and book festivals and those things, but takes a lot to promote a book. To invoke. It takes a lot of energy and time and money and often it doesn't. You don't get that back. It's no very few people get rich writing a book. People need to be disabused of that idea that they're going to have a bestseller and ride off into the sunset to their island in the Caribbean or something. Most books don't do that well, and it requires a lot of work to market them. And it's also, I don't know what the numbers are. Is it 50 or 100,000 books come out every year? I don't know what the numbers are, but it's pretty high.
Yeah.
It's astronomically high. And so how do you get noticed in that sea of avalanche of books that are coming out? You need to have some kind of a plan and the book's got to, it's got to be a good book too, right?
Right.
But that's not enough. It could be the greatest book in time. I think Jonathan Livingston Seagull. I mean, he was turned down by I don't know 200 publishers, until he finally got picked up. So, of course, the business has changed a lot since those days. So, yeah.
Pretty much so. So, talk about your book, Story Intelligence. What inspired you to write it? Why did you write it? And what is it about? And
Mm-hmm.
all
So, 2 or 3 years ago, I have a business writing partner in Storywork International, which is our little company that promotes the power of story. And over dinner one night, I was saying, I mean, if there were, if story was a power, how many powers? What would the powers be? How many powers would there be, and what would they be? And then we began musing on that, and I've always believed that story is our native language. We all speak story. We're wired for it profoundly, and so we decided at some point we kind of landed on what we thought the seven powers were, although they went through a little bit of tweaking and changing. I had the first power of story is to entertain. And I realized that as I started researching and developing the book, that was a mistake. It's actually to transport. That's the power of story, is it takes us someplace else, another place, another time, in the future or in the past, into a sci-fi world that could never exist, or into a fantasy world. That's the power of story, is to transport us. And so then we began looking at the other powers. One is to communicate, and story. We now know that when people are communicating using stories, they're much more persuasive and more powerful. But stories also have a pernicious negative side to them. That we can also infect people with lies, and every religious tradition has talked about this. And in my tradition, I'm Jewish, so there's the term is called Lashon Hara, which means to speak with an evil tongue. And speaking with an evil tongue is equivalent to murder in the pantheon of sins. It's no minor thing, you know. And you look at how much the words people speak today, and how easy it is to just spew things on the internet and social media that is toxic and can destroy lives. So there's that side of it, is that stories can literally, someone can tell a story that can ruin your life. They can, you know, it's a lie, but it gets spread. There's a wonderful story about a woman who is spreading lies in a community, and the rabbi calls her in and tells her, "You've got to stop this right now. You cannot keep doing this." And she's repentant. She realizes it's been a bad thing, and she says, "But I have an assignment for you." He says, "Tomorrow morning, I want you to take a feather pillow and go to the town square and cut it open. And then I want you, after it's open, I want you to collect all the feathers and bring them back to me." And of course she does. It's a windy day, and those feathers are scattered to the forever. And she comes back and she realizes, once our words are spoken, we can't bring them back in. We can't say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I said all those terrible things about you, Casey," because now it's spread all over the internet. I can't go back and collect them all and say, "Oh, I was lying about that," or I over exaggerated that. So there's that side of it that's really important, that we understand that we have responsibility for the words we speak. And from a communication standpoint, we also have a responsibility for the words we take in, is that we're discriminating in the stories we hear. You know, we don't just take it in and ingest it and just go, "Okay, well, that must be true. It's on the internet." You know, well, we know that's not true. So we have to be discriminating consumers of stories. And I think that's the second thing. And the third was the power to enable learning. I had a teacher early in my life, in story life, in the 1990s, Paula Underwood, who came from the Oneida tradition. In her tradition, they don't even have a word for teach. So they don't believe you can teach anyone anything, but you can enable them to learn, and that's why stories are so powerful. Then the fourth is to create meaning. So I think that stories are a means for us to create context and understanding of our lives. It's only on reflecting on our experiences in the story and then telling the stories and trying to make sense of the stories. Because once something happens, it doesn't exist any longer. It only is kept alive in the story that we tell. And those stories are fundamentally interpretations of what happened. They aren't what happened. They're a selective interpretation. We now know that our brain can only process maybe 120 bits a second or something like that. You know, there's probably 40 million bits of information around at any one moment. So we're very selective when something happens. We're selective in what we choose to focus on in the retelling of what happened. And so we include certain things, maybe because there was a large emotional charge, and we exclude other things. And we've all had the experience maybe with a sibling where you're talking about something that happened when you were growing up, and your sibling go, "Oh, that's not what happened. Let me tell you what well, you must have had your head in the sand or something. You know, that's not what happened. Dad didn't do that. He did this." And you know, there's no video camera in the sky that we can go refer to the tape and see what really happened. So we make interpretations, and we are selective. So once we have a story about the past, the story is open to reinterpretation. We don't. But often what happens is we often keep telling that same story over and over again. So it's no longer the event that wounds us. It's the story we keep telling about the event that happened that wounds us. And then we continue in a loop, and then we can get it can take us right down a spiral, you know, into depression. And the fifth power is the power to transform. So story has a transformative quality. It can take difficulty and challenges and what looks intractable, and it can change our lives. And that we don't have to be a victim of the stories of what happened. The sixth is the power to unite. And we know that stories can powerfully disunite us. can disconnect us. And we just need to look around the world we're living in right now and look at the way red and blue, black and white. People have become very polarized, and they've sort of living inside their story. And the people on the other side of the fence, they're not even human beings. They're less than human beings because we vilify others. Well, we've been doing that since the beginning of time. Humans have been doing that. But stories has the capacity to build a bridge between peoples and between peoples who are in conflict. So how do you do that, and do that in a way to heal relationships? And then the final power is the power to envision possibilities. And so we often think of stories as being retrospective, looking to the past. But stories, actually, we may be storytellers because of its prospective ability to look to the future. So those stories about the past are really there to help inform us about thinking about what we're going to do in the future. They give us a sense of a template or a map about what we want to follow. And so when we get better at envisioning the future, being able to imagine what the story would be like, we're probably more capable of walking into that story and making it real. So if you take all this as a sum, we believe that there's a thing called story intelligence. So, emotional intelligence came out, though, maybe in the mid-1990s, where people began writing about emotional intelligence, and it became, as a concept, it got adopted. People, today, anyone in the corporate world, oh yeah, emotional intelligence, yeah, I took a course, they had training in it, yeah. And most people now understand that, being smart doesn't necessarily make you successful. It's your capacity to work with people, to understand yourself, to empathize. Those are all important capacities. And it was research that really helped to open that idea up. And we think there's actually even a deeper level of intelligence. We're calling it story intelligence. That our ability to understand ourselves as human beings as narrative creatures. So, Carl Linnaeus in the 1700s named human beings Homo sapiens. And I think he did that because Descartes came out in the 1600s and said, I think, therefore I am. So there was a real emphasis, there was just a general belief that it was what was going on in our head and our intellect that was so important that defined who we are. And so if you think of Homo sapiens like wise human, and it was about that. Whereas I think what we really we need to change our name to Homo narrare, which is narrating or story human. And so I think a better watchword for us is I story, therefore I am. It's our capacity to create stories about the world that defines us and defines the world we live in. So if you want to change the world, you need to change the story. You need a different story. If you want to change your life, you need to look at what story have I been telling, and how has that story kept me in shackles? What's a more empowering story that I could tell, given the same facts and the same kind of realities on the ground? Is there a different story I could tell about myself that would help me be happier and also more effective in my life, in various facets of my life? So that's where the idea came from. And so what we tried to do in the book, Daniel Goleman, when he wrote Emotional Intelligence in 1995, it was the research that really kind of drove it. But the research preceded it. He didn't come up with the idea. There were many researchers who began promulgating this idea. Howard Gardner at Harvard talked about multiple intelligences. But there's a lot of research that's been done on the brain with MRI studies in the last 10 years and 15 years. And we're beginning to see our brains are wired for this. Our brains are wired for narrative. And when if you're able to look at a brain while you're listening to a story, or reading a story, it's like it's lit up like a Christmas tree. Everything is engaged. If you're just listening to someone give a lecture, a didactic lecture, It's maybe engaging the language, so that the language processing and centers of in the mind and the brain. So so we think this is integral to what it means to be a whole human being. And the more people become aware of it, the more, I think, the more empowered they are to live a full life. Yeah. So that may be more than you wanted there.
It was a lot to take in. So somewhat going off the subject now, and you did touch base on it already, but we know that you decided to go it alone. What were some things you learned during the process that may have caught you off guard, and how did you, you know, go over the hurdles of publishing?
Well, I'll tell you that the journey on this book, which is sort of, I think, instructive, is that I have a friend here in Atlanta whose sister is an agent in New York. And when we were having lunch one day, and she said, and she didn't know I was working on a new book, but I've been, it's been a 2-year journey with this thing. It's been a long journey. And she said, well, let me introduce you to my sister. And I said, great. So I wrote her, and she said, well, I'd be interested. Send me the book, or send me a synopsis of the book. And at some point she said, well, to sell a nonfiction book, I need I need a marketing plan. Okay. Or a book proposal, which is basically a marketing plan for the book. And, the thing that publishers are looking for today is the question of what's your platform? And what they mean by that is, how many contacts do you have on Facebook? How many people are following you on LinkedIn? How many, if you did a TED talk, how many watches has it had? Or, do you have, how many, if you did a previous book, how many books did you sell? And I have a platform, but it's not mammoth. It's not, it's not Barack Obama or Michelle Obama size platform. That's the kind of platform they love having, as somebody who's got that kind of name in the marketplace. And the marketplace has gotten more consolidated. Everybody, there's maybe 3 or 4 major publishing houses now, and that's it. And you have a lot of small imprints, but so she came, she said, I love your book. And she said, I'm not gonna be able to sell it. It's just, it could be the best book. It could be the best book on story ever written. And I can't sell it because that's not the way the market is functioning today. So I think people have to be aware that the book is book sales, the book business is a business. And publishers are interested, used to be they were interested in taking a good author and developing them and nurturing them, and you find an editor who would work with you, and they would promote your book and everything. The really instructive thing for me is when Hyperion published The Healing Art of Storytelling in the mid 1990s. Oprah was coming out with it. They were also it was in their house at that time, and she was coming out with a new exercise book or diet book. I can't remember what it was, but it was something like that with her trainer or her chef. And they had $1 million budget to promote the book. And I called them. They had, they arranged a couple things for me, and I called them and I said, "Oh, listen, I'm going to be doing a workshop in San Francisco. Maybe we could set something up at the Barnes and Noble for me to give a talk." And the editor on the other end of the line said, "Well, we don't have a budget for that." And I went, "Oh, you don't have a budget for that? Oh." It's like, so that was the rude awakening for me, is that even if you have a publisher, they're not going to do a lot for you unless you're Barack Obama or Michelle Obama, or you're a major a major fictional writer. They'll push your book, but they're not going to do a ton for you. It's going to be in your lap. So you have to take responsibility for the promotion of the book. So we made the decision. We looked at, she recommended a publishing house that's kind of a hybrid. They don't take every book. They scrutinize it, and they said, "We like your book, we'll take it on." But when we looked at the economics, when it was all told, it was going to be about $80,000 to bring the book out. And I said, that just doesn't, just doesn't make any economic sense to me in any way. One, I just didn't, could have scraped the money up with my partner. You know, we could have probably come up with it, but it didn't make any sense at all for me to do that. So we ended up, another book that I co-authored with a former business partner called The Patient Survival Handbook, because I was working with this healthcare consulting group that focused on patient safety. We had worked with Book Logics, which is here in Alpharetta, just north of Atlanta. But I talked to a lot of different publishing houses that, you know, that are self-publishing houses, and they all had various different models for doing it. And when all was said and done, I liked the story at Book Logics. I liked talking with them. They were straight talkers. It wasn't, you know, it felt like everything was above board. This is what we'll do, and here's how we'll help you, and we'll get the book, and here's how we'll get the book to market, and here's what we can do, and here's what we won't do, won't be able to do, it'll be in your court. And then I did get I got a friend who's a good editor. He did a first pass on the book. You need to have another eye on the book. You know, we're all too close to it. And you need someone else who can look at the book and read it. And my wife is also one of my editors. I let her read stuff, and she, you know, if she goes, I didn't understand this paragraph. What are you talking about here? You know, you know, and I go, really, you don't understand it? Well, I now, you know, I don't argue with that. If someone says, I just don't understand, it doesn't make any sense to me, then I haven't done my job right. Because, you know, my job is not to confuse my reader. My job is to write something that my reader is going to be nodding their head and go, yeah, oh yeah, I got that. Yeah, that makes sense. Oh yeah. So we get too close to it. So you need someone who really is has a good eye for good writing. And then at Book Logics, they also had an editor review the book, and she had a lot of recommendations and suggestions that I thought made it a better read, even after all was said and done. So but I think that the thing you've got to confront is, how are you going to take the book to market? So we're investing in that. I've got a publicity person. We've hired a company that pushes you up on. They get you to bestseller status on Amazon. They have a methodology for doing that and getting the book pushed out. We made the decision to bring out the audio version of the book, and I've done a fair amount of audio recording in some other capacities of my life. And I looked into that, and you know, there's some different models for that about how to do that. But I thought I'm better equipped to read this book than anybody else, because I know the topic and I do a really good job reading. So we're just finishing that up. I'll be back in the studio on Monday for some small cleanup of the book. And so it'll come out on Kindle, it'll come out on audio, it'll come on like Audible, it'll come out in paperback. And we're doing a short run of hardcovers, and using them partly for promotion, but that's a more substantial thing to put into somebody's hands who is an influencer than the paperback. I don't think it's a terrible thing not to have the hardcover, but I think it makes a difference. So I think you need to be prepared. I mean, we become too close to our projects and things, and we want to be published, and there's a lot of ego involved for all of us as writers. You know, you can't get away from that. But you need to be honest with yourself. You know, you're going to sell it to your 28 friends, you know, and every one of your relatives, and that's about as big a market as you got. Then maybe you go and you do an e-version of the book and you don't even get it printed. You know, that's the cheapest route to go if that's important to get it and actually have something. We think we have an important book that we think has some legs and that will generate some interest. Everyone I mentioned the title to go, oh, that's story intelligence. I haven't heard of that before. What is that? You know, so we'll see. You know, it comes out March 18th, so that'll be the proof in the pudding of what happens there. Yeah.
Okay. So it seems like this next question I probably shouldn't ask, because it seems like all of your time, resources, energy is on story intelligence. But are you by any chance um, thinking about working on anything else or
Oh
coming
yeah,
up with a new project, or are you
sure,
just right
yeah.
now on
No, I
CSB
am.
Television?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I've got a couple children's books that I have written that I've tried to get published. I've tried to find agents for them. I've gone to, I mean, they've gone around and around and around, but I still feel like they have legs. They have real potential. Um, I have actually I have a movie project. I wrote a screenplay a few years ago and then developed that into a one-man performance piece that I was doing before the pandemic hit. Um, I'd love to find a home to turn that into a film. It's about a mystic who lived in the 1700s, and it's all story. You know, it's just filled with these wonderful stories. Um, so those are kind of on the horizon. And I'm actually thinking of we're having a conversation about doing a show on the power of story and seeing if we could sell it to a Netflix or Amazon Prime that I would perhaps host. We'll see. That's another long shot kind of project, you know. But this is probably a good time for a project like that, I think. So, and then I have other ideas that are sort of back there, but you have to have you only have so much mind space at any one time, and to take on anything new. And so probably until this book is launched in another couple months, month and a half, and we get through that and all this, the marketing things and all the things we're doing to try to promote it, will I kind of come up for air and go, okay, what's next here? What's interesting to me? Where do I want to put my energy? Yeah.
All right. And the last question that I have, fun question, somewhat off the topic. Um, if you could, and this is pretend, so they don't have to be alive, they could be dead. If there's an author out there that inspired you or inspires you, or you like the way they write, or you've liked one of their books, if you had the chance to meet this author for conversation, who would it be and why?
Oh, yeah. Well, two come to mind. William Faulkner, whom I've always loved his writing. Um, as a, I haven't read any of his stuff recently, but in my younger days, I read a lot of Faulkner's work and loved his work. I'd love to talk to Plato. That would be a marvelous evening of dinner, to talk with Plato and just that would be amazing.
That's all the time we have for you today on The Ready Writer. I'd like to thank our guest, Richard Stone, for stopping on by, and for you, the audience, for taking the time to watch. Have yourself a great day.